She was told to move because she didn't belong in first class. But what happened next left an entire plane in stunned silence. This wasn't just a flight. It was a lesson in respect, power, and what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. Stay tuned, because this story, you won't forget it. It all started with a single glare and one bitter sentence. "You're in the wrong seat, miss." The words hit like cold water. Sharp, condescending, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Heads turned, eyebrows raised. A few chuckles escaped from neighboring rows, not out of humor, but from that all-too-familiar awkwardness people feel when someone causes a scene. Dr. Alana Pierce, calm and composed, had just placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment. Her cream blazer was still flawless, not a wrinkle in sight. Her matching heels tapped softly against the plush carpet as she turned and slid gracefully into seat 3A, her seat. First class, reserved, paid for, earned. She had boarded early, as always. She liked to avoid the rush, settle into her space, and breathe before a flight. It was her routine, one she'd refined after years of corporate travel. The smell of fresh leather seats, the quiet clink of champagne glasses, and the hum of privilege surrounded her. But then he arrived, tall, silver-haired, and radiating entitlement. The kind of man who moved like the world owed him something, and was late delivering it. His tone wasn't just annoyed. It was accusing. "I said you're in my seat," he repeated, louder this time. Arms crossed, chin raised. His voice, dripping with impatience, echoed like a command. Passengers started watching now. A woman in 4C leaned forward, pretending to check her magazine. A man across the aisle peeked over his tablet. But Alana didn't flinch. She had been here before, not just on planes, but in boardrooms, hotel lobbies, luxury car dealerships. Places where her very presence raised eyebrows. Where her skin, her style, her silence, everything about her, challenged unspoken expectations. Without raising her voice, without giving him the reaction he likely expected, she reached into her handbag, retrieved her ticket, and offered it with a composed smile. "No, sir," she said, her voice even. "This is my seat. 3A. See for yourself." He didn't lean forward, didn't read it. He just scowled. A quick glance at the ticket should have ended it right there. But it didn't, because this wasn't about the seat anymore. What followed was a different kind of turbulence, social, quiet, and heavy. The whispers began almost immediately. Tiny gasps, silent judgments. A couple exchanged knowing glances, as if to say, she must be confused. Another passenger shifted uncomfortably. One even chuckled as if entertained, because to some, it wasn't just unlikely that a black woman was seated in first class. It was unthinkable. Alana could feel it, that slow-burning, subtle tension that lingers when your identity speaks louder than your words. She'd felt it before, at investment pitches where male investors asked if she was the assistant, or at tech summits where people assumed she was lost. She sat still, staring straight ahead, her ticket now resting gently on her lap. She didn't know anyone in explanation, not the man standing above her, and certainly not the curious eyes boring into her from every direction. But the man didn't sit down. Not yet. "I think you must have read it wrong," he said, now addressing the growing crowd more than her. These seat numbers can be confusing for some people. That pause, before some people, wasn't accidental. It was weighted, intended to land. Alana's smile didn't fade, but inside, she felt that familiar flare. Not anger, focus. She had spent her life navigating rooms filled with people like him. People who saw her skin before her credentials, her gender before her genius, her grace before her grit. And always, they underestimated her. She had learned that the most powerful thing she could do was remain unmoved. Around her, the whispers continued. "Maybe she's in the wrong cabin," someone murmured. "Maybe it's a mistake," someone else offered. But it wasn't a mistake. It was her seat, reserved through her company's elite travel package. She'd flown this airline 100 times before. Her boarding pass had cleared it. Her status guaranteed it. Still, none of that mattered to the man standing over her, arms folded like he was preparing to deliver a lecture instead of sit down and mind his business. This wasn't about seat 3A. It was about the unspoken message in his tone. You don't belong here. And Alana knew that message well. It was the same one delivered in subtle tones and condescending smiles across her entire career. It came in the form of suspicious stares at luxury hotels, passive-aggressive questions at country clubs, and overly curious, "Are you sure this is your reservation?" from front desk staff. It never got easier, but she had grown stronger. She sat, back straight, shoulders relaxed, and eyes focused. Not angry, not rattled, just firm, because she knew something the man didn't. She belonged in that seat. Every mile she'd flown, every late night she'd worked, every company she'd built, it all added up to this moment. And no amount of disrespect from a stranger could take that from her. Still, the cabin grew heavier with the silence. A standoff in the sky, a quiet test of dignity. And soon, someone else would have to step in. But for now, Alana waited, patient and unbothered, as the man huffed beside her, trying to reclaim power in a situation he no longer controlled. And all she had done was sit down. The flight attendant arrived moments later, her soft steps barely making a sound on the carpeted aisle, but her eyes were sharp. She could feel the tension in the air, thick, awkward, uncomfortable. You didn't need training to sense it. It hung around row 3 like a storm cloud. The silver-haired man, already flushed with frustration, turned toward her the moment she approached, puffing up his chest like a schoolboy desperate to report a classmate. "She's clearly in the wrong seat," he snapped. "You need to move her now." He said it with the kind of authority that assumed he'd be obeyed, not questioned, the kind of tone that had probably worked for him his whole life. In business, in restaurants, even at home. The tone of someone who believed his opinion was fact the moment it left his mouth. Alana said nothing, not because she didn't have words, not because she was unsure, not because she was afraid. She remained silent because she knew how this game worked. She had played it before, more times than she could count. When people like him made a scene, they wanted a reaction. They wanted noise. They wanted an argument, something to make them look like the victim when things didn't go their way. Instead, she chose stillness. She let him reveal exactly who he was. The flight attendant, her name tag read Maria, was a young woman, probably in her late 20s, with a neat ponytail and eyes that darted between the two of them. Her smile was tight. She was trying to stay professional, but the discomfort was plain on her face. She looked like she'd walked into a fire she didn't light. "Let me check your tickets," she said calmly, trying to ease the temperature in the room. Alana handed hers over with quiet confidence. Maria scanned it, then took the man's without a word. A few moments passed. Maria's brows furrowed just slightly, and then her shoulders relaxed. The answer was clear. She turned first to Alana and gave a soft, apologetic nod. Then, slowly, she looked at the man and delivered the truth. "Sir, she's correct. Seat 3A belongs to Dr. Pierce. Your seat is 3B. You're next to her." You could have heard a pin drop. For a moment, the man didn't move. He stared at the flight attendant like she'd just spoken another language, as if somehow she was now the one in the wrong. "No," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "That can't be." Maria didn't argue. She simply extended his boarding pass back toward him, gently but firmly. "Your seat is here, sir." His face turned red, not just with embarrassment, but something uglier, wounded pride. His jaw tightened. He looked at Alana again, as if still searching for something. Some excuse, some loophole, some way to pretend he hadn't just tried to publicly humiliate a woman who had done nothing wrong. But there was nothing left to say. So he huffed, muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like unbelievable, and dropped into the seat next to Alana with all the grace of a toddler forced in a timeout. Alana didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done to him. The row fell silent. Around them, other passengers pretended not to notice, burying themselves in magazines or scrolling through their phones. But their ears had heard, their eyes had seen, and the man next to Alana knew it. For the next hour, he said nothing, not a word, but his body language said everything. He leaned as far from Alana as the seat allowed, angling his knees away, arms tightly folded, gaze locked on the tray table in front of him. Like sitting beside her was some sort of punishment. Like he couldn't believe he had to spend this flight elbow to elbow with a woman he had so arrogantly tried to displace. But beneath that physical discomfort was something deeper. Shame. He wouldn't say it, would never admit it, but it had crept in. And Alana? She sat coolly, her eyes on the clouds outside, her laptop open on her tray table, typing effortlessly. Focused, composed, unshaken. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly known in those first few seconds of judgment, was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his day. Maybe his year. Maybe his life. This wasn't just any woman. This was Dr. Alana Pierce, a global tech leader, a Forbes-featured CEO, a woman who had built her company from a garage startup into an international powerhouse in under a decade. She had negotiated billion-dollar deals while being underestimated by rooms full of men just like him. She had broken barriers, shattered ceilings, and outperformed her competition again and again. Not with noise, but with results. And yet, despite all that, this man had looked at her and decided, based on nothing more than her skin, her gender, and his own narrow worldview, that she didn't belong in that seat. And now he was stuck next to her, wallowing in his own awkward silence, knowing the entire cabin had just witnessed his failure. Alana didn't need revenge. She didn't need to humiliate him back. She didn't even need an apology. She had already won, not just the seat, not just the battle of dignity, but the war of presence, of identity, of value. She didn't raise her voice, didn't call for justice, didn't make a scene. She simply let the truth sit beside him, as heavy as his own silence. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is take up space exactly where she belongs. Dinner was served. The soft chime of the seatbelt sign, turning off, echoed gently through the cabin as uniformed attendants moved down the aisle with practiced elegance. In first class, everything felt elevated. Soft lighting, plush white napkins folded with care, polished silverware, and meals plated like fine art. Champagne flutes clinked softly. The hum of the engines was low, soothing. In this curated world above the clouds, discomfort wasn't supposed to exist. But in row 3 it did. Alana sat composed as ever, her posture regal, her eyes calmly scanning the glowing screen of her laptop. The cabin's lighting reflected off the edges of her high-resolution display. Her open document read in bold letters, Pierce Global, Q3 Executive Summary. Graphs, projections, analyst comments, global revenue forecasts. The kind of data that made most people's eyes glaze over. But to her, it was second nature. This wasn't just her job. It was her empire. She was preparing notes for an upcoming board meeting. They were finalizing a partnership with a Scandinavian tech firm, and her attention to detail was sharp. The moment mattered. Even in the air, she was working, and that's when it came. A sound beside her. A smug little chuckle. Not warm. Not kind. More like the type of laugh someone gives when they think they've caught you pretending. She turned her head just slightly, already knowing it came from the man beside her. The same man who had tried to get her moved. The same man who had spent the past hour pretending she didn't exist. Now suddenly interested. Cute, he said, his voice a mixture of sarcasm and condescension. He gestured toward her screen with the tip of his wine glass. Playing CEO today? There it was. A jab wrapped in a joke. A comment designed to sting without sounding obviously cruel. The kind of insult so many women in power had learned to swallow. But Alana didn't bite back. Instead, she turned slowly to face him. Her expression didn't shift. Her smile stayed gentle, calm, deadly measured. No, she said simply, not playing. I am a CEO of Pierce Global. She held his gaze with quiet confidence, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. The man blinked. His smug expression faltered. For the first time since takeoff, his mouth stayed shut. He stared at her, processing. His eyebrows twitched upward ever so slightly, as if the foundation of his assumptions had just cracked. Across the aisle, another passenger, a well-dressed man in his early 30s with stylish glasses and a MacBook on his lap, had been quietly observing. He looked up now, surprise on his face. Wait, he said, leaning in. Are you Alana Pierce? As in the Pierce Global from last year's IPO. Alana turned to him, smiling modestly. Yes, she said. That's me. The younger man's jaw dropped. Wow, he breathed. You're a legend on LinkedIn. That IPO presentation? It was a masterclass. You flipped an entire sector overnight. That was historic. She nodded, slightly embarrassed, but used to this reaction. Thank you, she said. It was a team effort. The man smiled and raised his glass from across the aisle. To the Queen of Sass, he toasted quietly. Several nearby passengers turned their heads, intrigued. It was subtle, but the energy in the cabin shifted. Passengers who had earlier cast silent judgment were now casting admiration. The woman in 4C, who had once looked on with skepticism, now appeared surprised and impressed. And the older man in 3B, he turned pale, as if the altitude had suddenly caught up with him. His lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. There was nothing to say, no excuse, no apology big enough, no recovery. He hadn't just disrespected any woman. He had disrespected that woman. He had belittled someone who had graced the covers of business magazines, who had keynoted international tech conferences, who had reshaped the digital healthcare world and raised billions in investment capital. And all of it dismissed at a glance. Because she didn't look the part. Because his limited worldview couldn't imagine that a black woman, dressed elegantly but without pretense, could be more powerful than him, more brilliant, more known. And now, sitting just inches away from her, he couldn't retreat. He couldn't vanish. He had to sit in it, next to the very success he'd tried to erase with a smirk. He shifted uncomfortably, fidgeted with his tie, glanced down at his untouched steak, then back at the screen. But she didn't speak to him again. She returned to her document, scrolling smoothly through her quarterly numbers. Her face calm, her mind focused. No anger, no need for revenge. She had already won. And what made it worse, what made it unbearable for the man beside her, was that she hadn't needed to fight him. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lecture, didn't call him out in front of the cabin. She simply let truth and poise do the talking. That was her power. It wasn't just in the millions her company earned or the accolades that followed her name. It was in her restraint, her ability to make arrogance collapse under the weight of fact. He had made a snap judgment, and now that judgment sat in silence beside the very woman it tried to underestimate. What he didn't know before this flight was that power doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it sits beside you in a cream blazer, working quietly, and changes the world while you sip champagne. From that moment on, everything shifted. The air around her seemed lighter, not because the tension had disappeared, but because it had finally been understood. Dr. Alana Pierce no longer needed to prove anything. Not with her words, not with her tone, not even with her resume. Her presence had done all the talking. The flight attendants, now recognizing her, subtly adjusted their approach. Their smiles were no longer polite. They were genuine. One brought over a second dessert plate, unprompted, whispering, "On the house, Dr. Pierce." Another stopped by twice just to check on her drink, quietly filling her champagne glass without waiting for the signal. And it wasn't because she was famous in the traditional sense. She wasn't a movie star or a singer. She was something far rarer in that space, a black woman CEO with global impact. And she carried it with such dignity, such controlled elegance, that everyone around her could feel it, even those who didn't know her name. She had never raised her voice, never called for attention, never asked anyone to look at her. But they were all looking now. Even the man beside her, who had tried to get her moved, mocked her, dismissed her, was watching her differently. Not with admiration, not quite. More like confusion mixed with regret. He was trying to understand how he had missed it, how he could have misread her so completely. And so, he tried to repair. He leaned over with a forced chuckle, a softened tone. "So, what kind of tech does your company focus on?" he asked, pretending it was a casual question. Alana turned her head slightly and answered evenly. "AI platforms for global healthcare optimization, diagnostic tools, predictive treatment algorithms. We work with governments, NGOs, and over 300 hospitals worldwide." It wasn't a brag. It was just the truth. He blinked. "That's impressive," he said. "Must take a lot of leadership to run something like that." She smiled gently, but not invitingly. Yes, she replied. It does. He nodded, looking down at his untouched drink, searching for something else to say, something that would erase the awkwardness. He complimented her outfit, mentioned that his daughter was in college now, studying something similar, said he admired women like her. She nodded politely at all the right moments, but her boundaries remained intact. She didn't need his validation. His compliments, though better late than never, were unnecessary. Because respect, true respect, isn't begged for. It isn't taken. It's earned. And in Alana's case, it was earned before this flight ever left the runway. She had simply brought it with her. By the time the cabin lights dimmed for landing, the whispers had grown. Passengers across the aisle leaned over just to get a better look. One woman subtly pulled up Alana's LinkedIn on her phone and let out a soft gasp. Another tapped her seatmate and whispered something about that IPO last year. By the final 20 minutes of the flight, the transformation in the room was complete. Where there had once been judgment, now there was curiosity. Where there had been dismissal, now there was respect. As the plane descended, one young black girl, maybe 11 or 12, peeked out from economy. She had been watching the whole time, seated with her mother a few rows back. Her hair in neat braids, her eyes wide and bright. She approached nervously as passengers began unbuckling. She clutched a well-worn paperback in her hands and walked slowly toward Alana. "Excuse me," she said shyly. Alana turned, instantly softening. "Hi," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "I want to be like you someday." Alana's heart caught in her chest. It wasn't the awards, the deals, or the board meetings that defined her success. It was this, the next generation, the ripple effect of simply existing in a space people told you wasn't made for you. She leaned down, lowering her voice so only the girl could hear. "You already are," she said. "Just never let anyone tell you where you don't belong." The girl smiled wide, eyes shining with a new kind of belief. And in that moment, Alana knew this was the real power. Not the seat, not the silence she had mastered, not the admiration now filling the cabin, but the example she set by being exactly who she was, with grace, with intelligence, and without apology. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to raise your voice, it's to hold your place with quiet confidence and let the world adjust around you. And that day, mile after mile, cloud after cloud, Alana didn't just change the mind of one arrogant man in 3B. She shifted an entire room. And that, my friends, is the true story of how Dr. Alana Pierce didn't just claim her seat. She claimed her space. With grace, intelligence, and quiet power, she reminded everyone on board that real strength doesn't shout. It shows up. Speech balloon if this story inspired you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thumbs up, don't forget to like the video. Loudspeaker subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. Bell and hit that bell so you never miss a moment that might just change your perspective. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and remember, never let anyone tell you where you don't belong.